Americans are less religious than ever. So why have so many recent political speeches sounded like sermons?
Religion and Christianity are the biggest things missing from this country.
Do you know when someone's trying to manipulate you? It's not always easy, especially when that person is supposed to be a trusted source of news.
God created government.
Democracy is staged with the help of media that work as propaganda machines.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
Stand up, speak out, and pray that God will bless America again.
Christ, not Congress, will be what saves this country.
And I think you all should get a copy of God Bless the USA Bible Now and help spread our Christian values.
The only border we need to secure is that between church and state. I said what I said.
All right, welcome back to another LED Live with Samuel Tucker. Welcome to the show again.
Yes, good to be back.
We are discussing church and state, and we are going to talk about how the United States is potentially walking into this same pathway that we have seen in history happen before.
Dun, dun, dun.
Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing?
Yeah.
You will want to know this information because where it sounds like a great thing, we want God. We want God in everybody's life, but God is never forceful. He's never like, you have to do this, otherwise there's going to be consequences. And I think when you start placing the conversation in that field, bad things happen.
Very bad. Very bad.
How are we going to walk into this?
Yeah, so a lot of it, and as we're going to see, a lot of it is through manipulation. A lot of it is through manipulation. So it's a process that the ruling elite of really every civilization has used in order to make the populace to co-sign with what they try to do. And so we're going to get into some of that. You know, in our last session, we were talking about the influence of Roman Catholicism, the church and state with Constantine. And the reason why that's so necessary, and especially for our listeners, you know, that didn't watch that, we would highly encourage you to go back and look at that, because that really sets the groundwork for the psychology behind why the things today are going the way they're going. Because there's like two factions. You have people who sincerely want morality and proper Christian principle in society. And then there's a larger faction, especially among those that are leading this movement who have the power, that are not doing it because necessarily they love Christ, but because they want the earthly power that comes with it. And so we'll see some of that. So on the screen here, this is a symbol of something called social engineering. I don't know if we're familiar with that concept of social engineering. So as I'm pretty sure our audience can see, this is this ideology of left and right. You know, it's been coined as the Hegelian dialectic. And it's very interesting, just again, the iconography. You can see here at the cage at the very bottom, what's in the cage is freedom. So you have a puppet master, you have a person that's being manipulated with this left and right, and true freedom is in the cage. And it's amazing because the book of Isaiah actually talked about this, that he that, you know, departed from evil would make himself a prey. And so, you know, we even see this from a Bible standpoint. But yeah, we're just going to go over, at least initially, a lot of the forces that are being used to manipulate the consciences of men to get to this point of wanting this fusion of the church and state. So this is a woman by the name of Marilyn Ferguson. She was an occult writer. She wrote a very influential book called The Aquarian Conspiracy. I don't know if you ever heard of that book before. She wrote that a leaderless but powerful network is working to bring about radical changes in the United States. Its members have broken with certain key elements of Western thought, and they may have even broken continuity with history. And just building on that, this is a symbol of television. Now, we know that television is one of the great educators of modern society.
Yeah, there's a reason why they call it a program.
No.
It's programming you.
Exactly. Very good point. Very good point. There's a book called Television and International History. And especially as we're trying to educate ourselves, and even the work that we're doing here, reading is so essential. And unfortunately, we live in a day and age where so few of us read anymore. And, you know, I mentioned this in the last segment. I hated reading growing up. I mean, with a passion. But it's really impossible to be a proper Christian and not read, because we learn about God through the Bible, and you have to read in order to gain this. And so this says, television has become to delineate for us the boundaries of transgressions. The medium operates as a subtle instructor with the complicity of the audience. This says, at the bottom there says, the television image has thus to come to govern the senses and the conscience, to offer an ordering of things, even to exaggerate the chaos and orderlessness of things. So to just make that very clear, this is a symbol of the news media. And I know that especially during former President Trump's, presidency, this idea of fake news was really popular. Mm-hmm. And while this is not an endorsement of Donald Trump, there is a reality that unfortunately a lot of the news media is into manipulation.
Yeah, you can see that when you see the news clips where they're all saying the exact same thing. I mean, word for word, verbatim. That is not possible in just a randomized telling of whatever's happening in the world. That's a script being handed to somebody, and all these news channels repeating it.
Exactly.
Any way you have them grouped this way?
Oh, why? What? Yeah, so that's a very good point. So I got this off of a particular website. So this was talking about, I think in the middle was maybe kind of neutral. To the far left is like left-leaning outlets, and this is like, I guess, quote unquote, far-leaning right outlets. You get that? Get that in the dichotomy.
Which is a matter of perspective.
Exactly.
Because if you're listening to CNN all the time, you think everything on the other side is completely bogus.
Exactly.
And people that are, there are people that even listen to these ones in the middle column, and they, they have opinions about every other news network. Everybody's got an opinion about every other network that they don't listen to.
Well, I think when the assassination attempt on Trump happened, and it was almost like the left-leaning ones were saying like, "Oh yeah, he just fell." And I was like, how did you get that wrong? Like, you know what I mean? Like they would just even leave out some very key words and stuff, and then that's interesting.
It's crazy.
I thought maybe they were grouped by ownership.
Ownership. That's a very good point as well. This is from a book called To Kill a Nation. It says, the U.S. media, as with most of the news media in other Western nations, are not free and independent. They are owned and controlled by largely conservative corporate cartels that adhere to the self-serving neoliberal ideology of international capital. So this is essentially saying that the news media is primarily concerned with ensuring the financial interests of multinational corporations, that they stay in their proper place. Mm-hmm. And even on another point, I know that we're talking about church and state, but a lot of times, what we've seen even in our travels and speaking, and I'm pretty sure you all have seen this, as well, that even a lot of us as Christians are not interpreting current events in light of the Bible, but we're interpreting current events in light of Fox News and CNN and MSNBC and all these things.
Good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so this happens a lot.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
So what I mean by that is, like, a lot of times when people are thinking about politics, especially from the Christian perspective, they're thinking about certain value systems and stuff like that. But like, say hypothetically, you're talking about different events that happen, the Trump, attempted, assassination, people are saying that, this was, prophesied, this prophetic and all of this. And that's not prophecy. That's not prophetic. That's not in the Bible.
Right. I heard people equating that to like the deadly wound and then
Lord have mercy.
healed, and it's like, what?
That has nothing to do with that.
It's reversed.
Yeah.
So you have the Bible, which spells everything out, and then the news is everything as it's happening.
Yeah.
And people try to take the news and then insert it into Bible prophecy instead of using Bible prophecy to look for what's in history and look for the news.
Right.
It's the other way around.
So to some of our viewers, what would you say would be a real good reason to understand prophecy at this day and age?
Yeah. Well, I would even, expound on that not even just for this day and age, but just to be a proper Christian. I'm pretty sure everyone is familiar with, online audience, a man by the name of Isaac Newton,
Mm-hmm.
The very famous, mathematician and physicist, all that. He wrote a lot on Bible prophecy, and he's on record as saying that it is impossible to be a proper Christian without understanding the prophecies of the book of Daniel, because the book of Daniel talks about the Messiah and the specific time that he would come to the earth. The very first, promise of the gospel in Genesis 3:15 was a prophecy.
That's right.
And so, it's not merely as it relates to understanding the Democrats and the Republicans and, what's happening in the U.S., But prophecy from the very beginning of sin into the world has been a compass, a source of comfort for God's people so that they could have a source of consolation amidst all the confusion. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, so you can see like it would be impossible, like Daniel's, Nebuchadnezzar's statue. It would be impossible to guess the kingdoms that are going to play out in the world, and so many thousands of years go by, and it's exactly playing out like that. So, yeah, for sure.
No, yeah, because I even heard one person saying this is a theory that William Shakespeare wrote the Bible, and a friend of mine he was having a Bible study with this person, and they went through the prophecy of Daniel chapter 2, and then after the Bible study, my friend said, "Well, do you still think that William Shakespeare wrote the Bible?" And he's like, "Yeah, I don't think
no,
I don't think he did this." So we see the point as far as manipulation. Now, this is a very key character. This man is named Edward Bernays. I don't know if you ever heard of Edward Bernays.
Yep, Sigmund Freud's nephew.
Exactly. There you go. So his very famous book, Propaganda, and it's crazy because a lot of the people that are part of the, I guess, ruling elite, if you want to class it that way, which it really is, they will try to say that propaganda is a good thing. That propaganda, always needs to be used on a population. This is important. And so this is what Edward Bernays says, that the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government. Mm-hmm. This is his words.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was really instrumental in basically taking his uncle's writings about the manipulation of people and then applying that to the masses.
Exactly. And it was very lucrative for him as well. Made a lot of money. All right. It says continuous interpretation is achieved by trying to control every approach to the public mind in such a manner that the public receives the desired impression. It says often without being conscious of it, the American motion picture is the greatest unconscious carrier of propaganda in the world today. So this even piggybacks. You all did a segment not too long ago about God is not dead and all of that. And again, so this is just emphasizing the point that, news and movies and all of these things help to force, feed the public this narrative.
Right. And we've recognized for a long time a lot of these like religious themes that are in pop culture movies. And, people always have the question, like, are they sitting in a room, like trying to like come up with these ideas? How can we deceive people in the world? And there's no way that all these different production companies spread over all these different years.
Exactly.
I mean, we're talking thousands of people, thousands of different writers. How are they having this consistent theme of this story played out? And I really honestly believe because there is a spiritual force behind that is imbuing these thoughts with these people, and they don't even realize where they're coming from. But I think in terms of putting these kind of ideas out there and combining church and state back and putting them in Christian films, even when we talked about and brought this up on that segment that talked about God's not dead, there was people that were like, "What? Why do you think this is a bad thing? Like how dare you? We need God back in the system." And this is why we're kind of having this discussion right now. Is we want to understand, like, yes, we all truly believe that everybody needs God, but when you put God in the forceful situation of a legislative body that's saying, believe this or there's going to be problems. There becomes a spiritual deficit there that we need to understand.
So because that's a possibility of happening, we shouldn't put religion in there at all? Because you understand how you can't run away from it. Especially living in a democracy and we're voting, someone votes from their perspective. They vote from their ideology, their moral compass.
Of course.
And so if the population is largely one thought process, it's going to find its way within government. I think the problem is when the reverse happens, when the government starts imposing things on the people.
Absolutely. I think that it was a bad mistake to take the 10 Commandments out of the schools. I mean, those are things that everybody should, I bet, identify with, right? Like, you shouldn't steal from people. You shouldn't kill them. You shouldn't do these things that the whole world would benefit from not doing those things. But,
it's very interesting that because this discussion is really great. We're actually going to find out that not only should the 10 Commandments not be in school, but prayer shouldn't be in school. Now, because a lot of the framework for how we've understood how America should be has been through received wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
And the Constitution is very clear on matters. And this is why there was always supposed to be proper Christian education, because how in the world can a public school run by the state properly teach morality?
Mm-hmm.
And this is why having the church, properly spiritual and educating the children, people who wanted their children to be raised that way wouldn't have to worry about all the immorality and all the sexual stuff happening in the schools, where they could just have this one sphere where it's proper and they don't have to worry about all those nefarious, elements.
But it's not, right?
I'll say it again.
In terms of the Constitution, neither education or that concept of church and state are found within it.
Well, that's becoming a argument that is used. And especially, for those that do advocate it, because it's a very good point. It's really a misunderstanding of what the Constitution is clearly saying. Because, when the Constitution talks about that at no time, should religion be used as a test for public service and all of these things, persons may try to rework that to infuse their ideas of what they think that means. But it's very, very clear because, again, going back to, the understanding of morality, because true morality starts in the heart, the state can never govern in that realm. And even if a person is Christian, their Christianity, yes, is going to influence how they make decisions, but there is a general morality that society has to abide by that is not necessarily attached to Christianity. Because in a Hindu society, everyone can't kill each other. Everyone can't, practice extortion. Everyone can do all these things. Yes, in principle, they're in the 10 Commandments, but even if you're in a Muslim society, everyone can't steal. Everyone can't, do all of these things that society would break down if they were permitted,
Mm-hmm.
And so continuing with that point, because I know we've gone a little past. So this is the symbol of church and state. So this has been modernly coined as Christian nationalism. So I'm pretty sure this, concept is, familiar to some of us. So these are two authors by the name of Andrew Whitehead and Samuel Perry. This is the second man, Samuel Perry. And they wrote a book dealing with this idea of Christian nationalism. So this says, simply put, Christian nationalism is a cultural framework, a collection of myths, traditions, symbols, narratives, and value systems that idealizes and advocates a fusion of Christianity with American civic life. Now, we know from a Bible standpoint, Christianity is not American.
Right.
Christianity is not Korean. Mm-hmm. Christianity is not, Ghanaian. Christianity is the religion of God. And unfortunately, men, and not just in America, have always tried to infuse their culturalness into the, universality of Christianity. And that's wrong, because it always leads to the exclusion of persons who don't adhere to that cultural idea. All right, so it goes on to talk about all these things. It says at the bottom, Christianity of Christian nationalism represents something more than religion. It says, as we will show, it includes assumptions of nativism, white supremacy, patriarchy, and heteronormativity, along with divine sanction for authoritarian control, emphasizing that point of militarism. Now, we're going to go through some of this in detail and really get an understanding of what they're talking about. Now, does everybody remember this epoch in American? Mm-hmm. So this is Colin Kaepernick. Mm-hmm. Now, principally, and I know that this created a lot of vitriol. Some people loved him. Some people vehemently hated him. Mm-hmm. Now, principally, him bending the knee, this is protected by the Constitution. But a lot of Christians were saying that this was wrong and all of this. Now, notice. This is a man by the name of C.P. Bowman. This is a very, as it were, prolific Christian writer around the turn of the 20th century. Very interesting what he says. So he says, there is nothing divine about the flag. Only as the flag stands for liberty and justice is it worthy of respect.
Sure, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now, even before, notice what he says. We give our heads and our hearts to God in our country, one language, one flag. Bending the knee is in reverence is an act of worship. Hence, it is an act that might very properly be refused on religious grounds. Notice the Romans held that the state was divine. Indeed, The Roman state was the chief divinity, from which all other gods of Rome derived their dignity. But God forbid that a like idea should ever attach to this government in the minds of American citizens. So unfortunately, we've gotten to the place where even the American hierarchy, the American state, is literally seen as divine. So again, any symbol associated with that divinity is going to be venerated as if it's God itself. And so as a result of that, when the man, was bending against the flag and all these things, people were acting as if God himself was being attacked, but he wasn't. He wasn't. Because a lot of times there's something called cognitive dissonance. And especially a lot of us as Christians don't realize that the empire of the United States is not going to last forever. I mean, sometimes it's as if we think America is just going to continue.
Right.
Yeah. But the Bible is very clear that Jesus is about to set up an everlasting kingdom that's not only going to do away with the United States, but do away with Russia, Ukraine, Iran, all of these nations. And so we have to be in that mindset and understand that.
You could see some of that same idealism coming out recently in the news with J.D. Vance's wife, because she's Hindu.
Yeah,
she comes from a Hindu family. Her parents are practicing Hindus. She's a Hindu. And the MAGA tribe, I guess, for lack of a better word, was very upset about that. And thought that he shouldn't be picked as a running mate because she was Hindu. They were making very pointed comments about, she's not even Christian. And, she's clearly Indian, as in from India, her cultural heritage. And they were making comments like, the Indians are just trying to take this country over. Wow. And you could see very much this Christian nationalism.
That wasn't an argument when a Catholic was president.
No, it wasn't.
Yeah.
And the frustrating thing is when you're looking at all of this, these are smart people that put out documents like, Mandate for Leadership, which is what, helped engineer Project 2025.
Heritage,
Christian nationalism, all of this. These are smart people, right? Very smart people. So logically, if we already know that if you want to change the direction of a nation, you use the media. Well, then why are they going to the legal system? You want to improve the country and you want to improve its morality, then shouldn't we be improving the media? Or maybe just do away with it?
Yeah. It's a very good point.
They know how powerful the media is.
Instead, we go and try to maneuver legally instead of changing the other.
Right.
Exactly.
Or don't recognize and say, hey, could this be contributing to this immoral situation?
I say that, and one of the things that the Seven Mountains Mandate is looks at is the arts and entertainment industry. But still, it's almost like putting the cart before the horse.
Well, I think it's because the two go hand in hand, government and media. I mean, the government influences media so heavily that, if you control the government, you're essentially controlling the media.
Yeah, I mean, and especially, when we think about this idea of Christian nationalism, the Christian nationalism will attach itself to whatever culture it is working out of. So again, we talked about, Roman Catholicism. So again, it's called Roman Catholicism because the cultural framework it was working out of was Roman. So, if it was, this Christian nationalism in India, it would have this Indian cultural framework connected to it and would have all of these pageantries and all that. But it's so antithetical to Christianity because Christ was literally inaugurating a religion where there was no caste, no creed, no Greek, Jew or whatever the case may be. There was going to be one fold and one shepherd. But, when true spirituality is not the focus, all of these other influences will find their way. All right. So continuing. So these are a lot of advocates of the Christian nationalism. One by the name of Marjorie Taylor Greene. This is a gentleman by the name of Doug Mastriano and Laura Boebert. The rise of theocracy among conservatives. So they talk a lot about how, so this is literally from Laura Boebert. She says, the church is supposed to direct the government. The government is not supposed to direct the church, which is true, but the first part is incorrect. That is not how our founding fathers intended it. Now, maybe the false founding fathers, but the true founding fathers of this nation would have vehemently disagreed with this reality.
You're going to have to false, true.
Huh?
False founding fathers, true founding fathers.
Yeah. So, again, there's a lot of history that's given in regards to the country. So, truthfully speaking, there were really only a select few of the founding fathers, especially when you talk about all of the individuals that influenced this nation becoming what it is, that really understood this aspect of civil liberty. One of them was a gentleman by the name of Isaac Backus, and he doesn't get a lot of fanfare, but he greatly helped to influence, what became the Bill of Rights. Also, Roger Williams. Roger Williams was a very strong advocate of not only civil but religious liberty. And while, the Puritans, we'll get into it, as the Puritans were persecuting the Baptists and Native Americans and all these things, Roger Williams said, no, yes, they don't, have our faith, whatever the case may be, but they're human beings and their religious liberties also need to be respected. And, he then became the founder of Rhode Island. So while it is true, obviously, people like Jefferson and, Hamilton and Washington, they were used in the sense that there were a lot of things that they inculcated, but there were a lot of unfortunate moral contradictions with a lot of these men. But this is how nations are formed. There's good and there's bad. All right. So this is the influence of overt Christianity. So now some persons of our listeners may be confused. Now, there's nothing wrong with Christians wanting to be a blessing to politicians. The Bible is very clear in 2 Timothy and Romans that we should pray for those in elected position so that we can lead a peaceable life. Because again, persons may hate Donald Trump, but Jesus died for him. And one of the things that we really emphasize is that it really kills me when I see us as Christians so involved in this political process that we sound like a person who doesn't know the Lord. So like we hate this politician, we hate that politician, as if God's primary concern is whether or not a Democrat gets in office or a Republican gets in office. It's crazy. Doug Mastriano is another unfortunate point. So I'm pretty sure we've all heard of the concept of white privilege. So Doug Mastriano, and God bless his heart, I know that, he wasn't intentionally trying to be nefarious, but he said, instead of saying white privilege, we should call it white blessing because of the blessing that, slavery was, because it helped to build a lot of our infrastructure and all in all of this, reality. Again, he apologized and so on and so forth. And this is not as a means to beat up our dear brother. But again, when we're talking about the Christian nationalism, this is unfortunately some of the ideologies that are infused with it as well.
Well, that might actually help. You're supposed to share your blessings, So changing the word might change the perspective.
Yes. But again, let's not just think about this in regards to the United States. The Roman Empire was doing the same thing when they adopted Christianity as their official religion. All right. So we're getting down to the crux. Now, this is a symbol of the Puritans. Now, part of the reason why I talk about the influence of Catholicism was so important is because the Puritans get a lot of their theological framework from a lot of Catholic disposition. So the Puritans get their religious heritage from a gentleman named John Calvin. Now, John Calvin, for some of our listeners who may know who that is, he had the greatest theological influence on Christianity, especially Protestantism, when we talk about that. But unfortunately, John Calvin didn't understand the separation of church and state. And because the Puritans were staunch Calvinists, they brought this understanding over to the New World. And so as a result of that, this is the heritage that helped to found the United States. So again, A.T. Jones. So this man was an historian, Christian theologian around the turn of the 20th century, wrote a lot on religious liberty, especially as it relates to a Bible prophecy, a lot of good material. It says that they were so persecuted, talking about the Puritans, and abused by all classes as well as by the officers of the law that in 1608 they fled to Holland. And then jumping down, it says, from there a company of these pilgrims sailed and landed at Plymouth, New England in 1620. Now, I'm pretty sure a lot of our listeners are familiar with this. This is some American history that's still taught. In the middle, was not here an opportunity to establish a complete and unabridged Puritan government? So while they were escaping religious persecution, they also wanted to establish a Puritan theocracy here in the New World. All right. It says in 1629, a royal charter was obtained. And in the middle, it says a Puritan or Calvinistic government was at once established and put into working order. So this is how the 13 colonies were originally established. It was a fusion of church and state, a fusion of that reality. All right, it says in the middle, thus the polity became a theocracy. By the fundamental law of the colony constituted the oracle of the divine will, a commonwealth of the chosen people in covenant with God. And lastly, it says, this was the Calvinistic system precisely. The preachers were not to hold office in itself, but they were to be the rulers of all who did. So in the colonies, they might not have been the politicians, but all the politicians went to them to get their, policy signed off on. It says this was to make the preacher supreme. They were consulted in everything, and everything must be subject to their dictation.
That's not very different than Catholicism.
Exactly. It's literally the exact same thing. So whether you call it Catholicism, whether you call it Christian nationalism, the principle is the same.
Is that why it's like an image of?
Exactly.
Cultures don't change overnight.
Yes.
And so, I've had this conversation with our friend Alex Castillos. He's from Mexico, and I've been to a lot of Spanish-speaking congregations. When you go as a speaker, you'll notice you go in, it doesn't matter what your background is. If you're the one speaking, you're pastor.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just the way it is. You're pastor, huge amount of respect, right? From the get-go. And they don't know you from Adam. And I've talked to him about that, and I was asking him, why is that? And it really lined up with something I was thinking. And he's like, well, most of these people, their cultural heritage, as far as religiously, goes back to Catholicism.
Yeah.
Right? And that's the way it was. You have a village, the whole village, the main guy is the priest. Everything revolves around the priest. Whatever the priest tells them to do, it's what happens, right? And so you notice how that carries over even when they become Protestants. It's like a whole church really revolves around a pastor. You don't have a pastor in place. It's like the whole place is in chaos. It's like they don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And it's not to say that, I'm not to fault them for that or anything. It's just an observation. The pastor seems to be the glue to that congregation.
Yeah.
And it's really kind of like when you just observe people, it's kind of like whatever he says, that's what happens.
That's what goes. Yeah. That's a very, very good point.
And it's not that there's anything nefarious going on anything evil or anything like that. It's just it's the cultural mindset. It just has continued to carry over where people from other cultures, they tend to maybe be more, for lack of a better word, rebellious. They're like, pastor told me to do what? I'm not doing that. There's less, I guess, levels of respect for a position and other things that play in.
That's a very good point. And, what's really helped me, even as, I've grown and just an understanding, just getting older, when you really just take time to understand why people think the way they do, why, they make decisions like that, and understanding a lot of this history, and even to the point that you mentioned, it really allows you to have more empathy, more sympathy, because even as we talk about this, a lot of the people who agree with Christian nationalism, many of them are not doing this because they hate people.
Right.
They're not doing, a lot of them are not doing this because they're intentionally trying to serve the devil and, forward his agenda, but because of the influences that have, affected how they think and operate, they've been led to these conclusions. That's why forums like this are so important to help re-educate.
They're doing what they think is right.
Exactly.
So I'm super curious. I know we're going to get to it, but why can we not have the 10 commandments and prayer in church?
Yes. So as we talk about this, reality of church and state, part of the reason is because when we talk about the place of the Bible in Christian education, it has its place in Christian education. So, just to, leave an example, people are getting up in arms in regards to J.D. Vance and his wife and Hindu and all these things. Now, if we're really going to talk about that this is a land of proper civil and religious liberty, if we're going to make way for Christian prayers, Christian 10 Commandments, by default, if we're going to be intellectually consistent, we're going to have to make way for Hindu prayers, for Hindu 10 Commandments, for Muslim and all of these things. And so now if, they want to do that from whatever type of standpoint, that's one thing, but we know that that's not going to fly. And so when the Constitution talks about this reality of not having religious tests and all of these things, it was really with the understanding that there was to be a complete separation of this. Because again, a lot of times people don't understand the framework that the founding fathers were coming out of. So even though, a lot of them, weren't completely moral in its proper sense, they were coming from Western Europe that was dominated by, kingcraft, where, they had this concept of the divine right of kings. So even though there was the Pope over there, and even in England, even though, after the 16th century, Catholicism wasn't dominating that country, the king was. And, as a result of that, the king was able to do whatever he did, whatever he wanted to do and stuff like that. And with religion being so infused into the state, they really wanted to ensure that that would not once again be replayed over in the United States. This is why we have 3 branches of government. This is why even if, a tyrannical president gets into office, there's still 2 other branches of government. And so these were all safety measures that were put in to ensure that this fusion of the church and state wouldn't happen. But again, when we're talking about schooling, especially from a Christian standpoint, and this would even be another subject on just Christian education in general, part of what made the Protestant Reformation so powerful was because Martin Luther and his associates were not just focused upon, abdicating from the papacy, but they greatly emphasized the importance of education. The whole idea of having the common people educated where, children can go to school came from Protestantism. And as the early reformers were educating the young people, Protestantism was very strong. There's a book by the man by the name of E.A. Sutherland called Living Fountains of Broken Cisterns, where he talks about that it was through education that Protestantism failed and Catholicism triumphed.
That's right. That's where they found their inroad back in.
Exactly. And so when we're talking about Christian education, it was never God's will for a secular state to be training a young Christian child on how to be moral. That was always to be the role of the church. And this is why principally, especially when you look at, the beginnings of the U.S., almost every church, no matter the denomination, had a school attached to it. Harvard, Yale were established as Christian institutions. They weren't secular. And so, so it would be a lot of that. Yeah.
That was sufficient.
Yeah. Yes.
I totally agree. And I think that education for, the way that you interact with God needs to happen from the home and from your church. And it does not seem possible that the state can make those rules, because that's exactly the argument that the Church of Satan came out with when they were like, oh, you're putting the 10 Commandments over here. Well, we're going to bring our thing over here. How are you going to tell them no? And then, so you have to make provision for everybody, which would then all of a sudden infuse the religion with a ton of different ideas.
But that's not what they're doing. They're not making provision for everyone. They're kicking Christianity out. And then neutrality in this context doesn't exist. It doesn't work. Because at the end of the day, morality is coming from somewhere. So if you completely take out Christianity, it's going to come from somewhere else. We're not going to talk about it or what have you, but it's coming from somewhere, and it's from the other side.
No, and this is why there was a general admission in the Declaration that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, the pursuit of happiness and all of this. So there was an acknowledgement that there was a Creator, but there was no specificity given to that religious framework. The problem is where in a secular state, a specificity is given to the acknowledgement of who that Creator is, what's his name, how you should follow him, and all of that. And so,
wouldn't you say it's equally as unconstitutional to say take it out completely? Wouldn't it be at the discretion of the school or even the teacher?
Well, if you're talking about specifics, again, if you're talking about Christianity or Islam or Hinduism or whatever the case may be, that's wrong from a constitutional standpoint. If you just want to talk about, general morality and a, search after truth and, philosophy and true philosophy and all of that, that's proper. Like, for instance, The Bible should be studied in certain aspects in public school because of its literary genius. Like, for instance, there are many secularists who talk about just the poetic mastery of the book of Isaiah. So it's not even being looked at from a religious standpoint, but just the moral upliftment from a literary standpoint that it gives. Again, you don't even have to force, the obligation of the Bible, but just studying it from, that standpoint would be very beneficial, as studying certain things from, Plato or, Aristotle or Socrates or Muslim writings and stuff like that.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
And I agree with what you said in terms of the responsibility of the church.
Yeah.
Instead of Christians trying to force Christian beliefs within public schools, they should be sending their children to Christian institutions. And as far as the government goes, don't kick out one. If anything, have an availability of all.
Yeah.
I just found it interesting. At the height of this, a few years ago, they were kicking out Christianity, but bringing in New Age. They're bringing in even secularism, which is a type of different ideology and religion.
For sure. Because, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yoga, all that. You know what I mean? Those are religions, and people don't look at that.
It is. So it just shows the hypocrisy a lot of times that happens. So going on with the Puritans. So again, as a result of them believing that God was leading them to the United States, and they literally, the Puritans believed that the United States was Canaan. So by default, all of the Canaanites in America had to leave. They had to leave.
That's awful.
Yeah. So again, this was the understanding that they had. So even the slaughter of the Native Americans, it wasn't a big deal because it was God's prophetic will.
See, that's where it's like, if you misapply some of those things that happen in the Bible, it's like you can bend that thing to say whatever you needed to say, and it becomes scary because when people think that they are serving God and doing the work of God, there's no end to where they'll go.
It's true. All right. So let's talk about Thanksgiving and kind of the myth of that. This was actually the persecution of a woman by the name of Mary Dyer. She was a Quaker. And, a lot of times, especially, when you talk about the slaughter of the Native Americans and slavery, there's a lot of vitriol that is, manifested because sometimes persons feel as though that they're being attacked, because of their history and stuff like this. But again, it wasn't just the, slaves and the Native Americans, but it was also Quakers, people of different Christian persuasions that were persecuted by the Puritans.
It's my understanding it was the Quakers who stood up against slavery.
Yes,
they got a Nobel Peace Prize for it.
Yeah, so don't get me wrong. Some of them did profit off of slavery, but as a whole, their general tenet was not endorsing it. Yeah, so that is very true. That is very, very true. This is from a very powerful volume called The Great Controversy, very powerful historical treaty written around the turn of the 20th century. This says the doctrine that God has committed to the church the right to control the conscience and to define and punish heresy is one of the most deeply rooted of papal errors. Very, very deep rooted. Now, again, some person will say, well, this is just white evangelical Christianity. That's really the problem. But it's not just that. Well, what is this? Are these people white in this congregation? Now, you can, this is a black congregation, but you can put any type of other cultural framework in there. It's really all a collective. And again, very many of us as black persons, voted for Obama, because he was black. And obviously, because of what a lot of us as black persons dealt with our forefathers, you can understand why there was such a gravitation towards this iconography. It makes a lot of sense. You're talking about grandparents that were in Jim Crow and slavery and all of this, and seeing a black man as the president, it's like, wow, like we've reached the zenith, so you can obviously sympathize and understand that. But unfortunately, our dear brother Barack was not encouraging proper morality. And so, again, it's one thing when someone doesn't know the Lord, but it's one thing, again, for Christians to be endorsing these realities.
Awesome. Yeah. We'll leave a link to his YouTube page below, and you've got a lot of awesome evangelistic series that you've done. He works with his wife. His wife does cooking, healthful living, and they're actually doing a little series around a church around here right now. So thank you for coming by and blessing us.
Indeed.
Like this video, share it with somebody that you think would know or want to know about this particular topic. And we thank you guys for stopping in and watching our ministry. If you'd like like to support Little Light Studios, you can go to our website, littlelightstudios.tv. There's a donate button right there, but just give it a thumbs up and a like. That's a huge help to us, and we thank you guys for watching.
Jacob, and he who formed you, Israel. I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God, and he shall go out no more. I will write on him the name of my God. Be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. The Lord shall renew his strength. They shall mount up wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. Alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God.
Do you have questions about the Bible that you've been struggling to find the answers for? Video Bible Study, or VBS for short, is a YouTube channel that answers your Bible questions in 5 minutes or less. Check out these easy to understand, comprehensive videos talking about everything from what happens when you die to why does God allow suffering. Make it your goal to deepen your relationship with Christ this year and subscribe to Video Bible Study on YouTube to help you along your journey.